Hello, my name is Jagmohan Chawla and I'm a product manager with SAP Cloud ALM. In this video, I would like to give you a walkthrough of an end-to-end story for SAP Cloud ALM for implementation. So let's get started. Let's look at this picture to orient ourselves. So in this picture, you have a container which you can call a project, and whatever is in this container is project specific, and whatever is outside that box is cross project. So that means for reusable purposes, you may want to have landscapes defined, systems mapped into SAP Cloud ALM, some tags or workstream definitions created. So all these assets are used in multiple projects. You can also have a deployment and release schedule which is applicable for multiple projects. And within a project, then you have some entities, as an example, teams, scopes, the requirements you create or the defects that are, as an outcome. So all these are project specific entities, and we'll get into them shortly. So each story has certain characters, and this is not comprehensive or complete, but just to help you understand, these can be some of the characters that are involved in a project. You need to have a release and deployment lead who looks at a schedule which is across projects and guides multiple project leads and ensures alignment. Then you have a project lead who has a particular charter, or we can also say scope, and the project lead says that no, I'm going to take this scope productive. Then there is system administrator who helps in initial onboarding of users, make sure they have the correct authorization rules. Then there are business process experts that use the system to go through all the BPM and diagrams and fit to standard workshops and end up creating requirements. Then there are consultants who actually help realize those requirements, and then test leads who also help along the way to ensure system is tested before the deployment happens. Now these personas I have not divided deliberately into customers or partners because that may depend on how you're running the project. The project lead himself may be coming from a partner or let's say a consultant, but it may not always be the case. This video will also follow a companion blog post in which most of the steps that I'm going to talk are already documented in this blog post. So I'm logged on to the public demo tenant of SAP Cloud ALM, and let's see. So let's say now I'm a system administrator and my goal is to quickly onboard users and even set up the systems. And the two tiles are mainly landscape management and user management. So let's look into the landscape management first. So SAP Cloud ALM is connected to the landscape services and knows your landscape, and all the data for the cloud systems is already pulled into your tenant. So you can quickly actually come to the screen and validate that the system of interest is added. Even for on-premise systems, so it depends on the software configuration, but there are agents that can actually pool those systems and get the data into SAP Cloud ALM easily. For more details, I really recommend you read the setup guide. Now assume the system data is there in place. Let's look at the user management. So as an admin, you are supposed to onboard users, and you can use the identity provider of your choice. And to onboard the user, it's really easy. You need to enter a unique ID and an email address and give the user specified authorizations. And now comes an interesting question. So do you set up the project first or the release? So it really depends on how complicated the project is and what is the scale of your operations. If you're operating with a small team with very well-defined dates and not much of a coordination, maybe you do not need multiple projects and one project is sufficient for you. But in this case, let's assume it's a quite complicated multi-country global plan, and this is where the release and deployment manager actually consults the project lead. In fact, there could be more than project leads, and they start by creating a release schedule first. And let's see how and where it is done. To To set a release schedule and also a deployment plan, you need to access the tile projects in setup. So this is a dual purpose tile. That means this tile contains information that is required for the initial setup as well as later when you create your project. In this case, our goal is to create a system group and a deployment plan for multiple projects. And here my role is a system administrator, but I also have the release and deployment lead along with me, which is giving me the details for the dates. So system group is a collection of multiple systems, also known as tenants. And the point you need to understand is this is just a collection. This does not indicate transport routes, but it tells you in general how the systems are interacting with each other. Also, this information is used in URL navigation when you have a task which is assigned to a particular system and a particular system role. You can create as many system groups as you want. What are the things that you need to understand? A system group is restricted to one product. And when you select a product, then the number of tenants that can be assigned to all these roles, and we call them systems. That means here you have 3 quality systems and they are assigned to the product SAP S/4HANA Cloud, and they have a description. In this case, it's mainline. So for the same product, you can create multiple system groups. As an example, if you're using SAP S/4HANA Cloud 3 system landscape, then you can have one main line and multiple project lines for the same product, SAP S/4HANA Cloud. You can also use system groups for completely different products. As an example, you can have success factors and you can again give a description and you can put different tenants or systems for success factors in different roles. How we use the system groups, I'm going to explain shortly. So let's start with the problem statement in which, in this case, the deployment lead wants to manage both success factors and S/4HANA Cloud together with the same schedule, because to facilitate integration testing of, let's say, recruit to retire scenario, you really want 2 teams to talk to each other. So how do we combine multiple system groups together? By creating a deployment plan. So let's do that. So now I have a deployment plan in which I have created 3 releases, and these releases indicate maybe a major event at the end of the release, such as a deployment. You can use these releases for different purposes. As an example, if you're doing a multi-country rollout, maybe each release denotes one country, and that really helps people to align to a timeline. This release window may also indicate a deployment or a non-deployment window if an upgrade is going to hit. So you can create a release saying do not deploy, because it just depicts a timeline in some visual charts that I'm going to show shortly. Okay. But let's look at this deployment plan at an entity level. So deployment plan constitutes of this release schedule and your landscape. So this is, at the end of the day, a planning tool for your deployments, and that's why it's called deployment plan, because to plan your deployments, you need to know the landscape and you need to know the timelines, especially for major events. Once you create a deployment plan, then you can assign it to one or more projects. And that's why we started with the scenario, which is more complicated. Again, you may not need it, but it's good to understand in full details. The same deployment plan can be assigned to multiple projects. That way, each project lead can have a local schedule, which constitutes of phase, sprint, or local milestones, but is always aware of a global heartbeat or a global timeline, which is coming via the release schedule attached to the deployment plan. And with this background information, now let's see how do you create a project. To create a project, you come to the project tab and click on the create button. In this case, I have already created a project and let me edit it. So the first thing you see is the template. And from where do we get the template? We get the templates from SAP Activate methodology. So a lot of products are supported. If you are not sure which template is the right one, you can click on this link and you will be taken to another environment which is known as Roadmap Viewer, in which you can see the tasks before you even plan to use them. After you have decided, and most of the time it depends on the leading product, which is in this case SAP S/4HANA Cloud, and then you need to define which one of these scenarios is relevant for you. You can select the template. Then what is this access level? So as a project lead, I need to decide, do I want the information in the project to be editable by all the users in the tenant, or the users which are specifically assigned to my project? Most of the time, the setting that will be relevant for you is restricted. So what restricted does is, the project is viewed by all the users in the tenant, but only the users which are explicitly assigned to the project in one of the teams can edit it. So if you are not sure, then my recommendation is leave it to restricted. You can always change it later. Integration scenario is an optional setup. So in case you are using SAP Central Business Configuration, then you can first you have to perform the setup, then it becomes enabled, and once you connect, then the tasks from SAP Central Business Configuration are also shown in SAP Cloud ALM. And we can ignore that for the moment because in this scenario maybe it's not required. As part of the project setup, one of your main goal is also to set the timelines. And here we have a nice 3-level possibility of setting the timelines, and we call that time boxes. You have to understand that this is a project specific entity. You can create custom phases if you want, but first look at the standard phases that are coming from SAP Activate methodology. And we highly recommend that you use SAP Activate methodology because we have experience from customers and partners, and we have evidence that the success probability of your project is significantly improved if you use SAP Activate methodology. In case your project is specific to only one phase, then you may want to deactivate the standard phases. And in case you as a partner have maybe additions on top of Activate, such as you have a cutover phase or a hypercare phase, then you can easily use this option and add a custom phase. There is also an option to create sprints, and what we strongly recommend is you align your sprints to a particular phase. So in this case, I have created 3 sprints, but as you can see, the dates are aligned to the realize phase of my project. You can also create milestones. We give you some of the standard milestones such as kickoff, plan, go live, and actual go live, but you can easily create milestones as well. And milestones and sprints, they get automatically sorted based on the dates. So that means the earlier entities appear first and they dynamically adjust. Now let's look at teams. As a project lead, I need to decide how many teams I'm going to use in my project. If my project is small, then just one team is sufficient. And that's why we actually automatically deliver one team called the PMO team as a default. If you think you're going to need more than one team, so let's say you want to split into analytics team, manufacturing team, sales team, no problem. You can easily create more teams. And how do you do that? You have to navigate to this tab outside the project. And here you can easily create more teams. And each team then can have different roles, and each role can have multiple individuals. And you see this icon, the different icon for role. Some of the roles are coming as standard from Activate methodology. But if you think this role definition is not sufficient, as an example, we don't have a role called Scrum Master or Product Owner. So if you think you really need these roles, then you can easily add a custom role by adding it in the role tab. You need to understand that when you add a custom role, it becomes available for all the projects and all the teams to be used. And that's why the role list can really grow in the period of time. And if you think this becomes overwhelming for you, then you can easily go into the edit mode and you can disable the roles which you do not plan to use. So after doing the team setup, let's proceed to understanding what is scopes. So a scope is a group of processes that you want to manage together. And how do you create a scope? Is by including one of the pre-delivered content packages that come from SAP. You can also extend the content definition by adding custom processes. But let's start by understanding it in more detail and go to the manage scope application. So here I'm on a particular scope, and if I go to the edit mode, then I see different solution packages that are provided, and SAP Cloud ALM has huge advantage that it comes preloaded even with business process content, and you can decide your scope includes one of them or multiple of them. You can also see the assets that you get with this content, and that's really a huge accelerator for you. That means you can see all these assets in SAP Cloud ALM, and you always get the latest versions. Within a scope, there are processes, and they have to be scoped by clicking on this process scoping. You can easily add processes to your scope by using the toggle button and saving your selection. And in this step, the project lead and the business process expert, they are working together and going through the scenarios that are really required to make this happen. So the business process expert and the project lead together will decide how many scopes are required and how do you slice your scopes. Do you slice your scopes by organizational units such as plants? Do you slice your scopes by country? Do you slice by scopes by lines of business? This is a decision that you have to take based on the circumstances in the project. So I'm back in the project and I see the scopes that belong to this project. And now let's look at the last tab, which is the deployment landscape. Now you'll recall when we started this journey, then the first thing that we did was created a deployment plan which had these system groups assigned. So what I've already done is I have assigned the deployment plan to this project, making the landscape visible to my project. Currently, this is the only way to make a project landscape aware. Now let's proceed to the next chapter in the story, which is fit to standard workshops. So how it typically happens is the business experts want to quickly review if the delivered SAP processes meet the requirements or if there are certain gaps that need to be addressed, which can be fulfilled by multiple sources such as BTP extensions, in-app extensions, and so on. To speed that process up, it's really important that the business process expert has a visual picture in front. And that's what this capability offers. As I mentioned, scope contains these solution packages, and this solution packages contains these processes, and the processes can be reviewed. Now looking at the screen, you can imagine the value because you don't need any offline assets or struggling to find what is the latest version of a particular business process delivered by SAP when an upgrade is done. So what is the latest content via 2208 as an example? Because all of that is in system and always kept up to date. And also, rather than having offline Excel sheets managing requirements for these processes or even process steps, you can really do your fit to stand workshops in system and document your requirements in the context in which they appear. As an example, for let's say this create a web connection, if you have a specific requirement, you can just click here and actually create a requirement in this context. The business expert and even maybe the consultant together, they can enter the details and then come back to the original screen. This may seem a small step, but it has huge implications in downstream processing. Rather than worrying where are my requirements, were the requirements created, you can really think where are my processes, because there is a predefined report called Solution Process Traceability, in which as a business process expert, I'll be more relaxed by tracking my business processes so that I need to know that, okay, where is my 53M process, and automatically let the system worry if this process has 1 requirement or 10 requirements. And when I look at the solution process traceability report, then I also see the subsequent stages of artifacts of that requirement, which we'll see shortly. Now let's take a small detour and see how project lead is tracking all these things while they are happening. Because there may not be one fit to standard workshop, but multiple fit to standard workshops that may happen in parallel. Each one may need planning, each one may need tracking, due dates, logistics, and also maybe a certain sequence has to be followed with certain dependencies. And this is where the task list comes really handy. So this task list has multiple filter options such as types and sources, so you can quickly find which tasks came via SAP Activate methodology, or if there is a connected SAP Central Business configuration, then you can quickly find the tasks coming from here as well. As a project lead, I have multiple options available at my disposal. As an example, I can edit these tasks by using a mass edit, which expedites my entire experience. If I find the content itself missing in the instructions that I get from SAP, then I can easily upload my own content. The steps for Excel upload and download are really easy, but I recommend that you read a detailed blog post about that, and that link is also available in the description of this video. You can also use this capability to not just upload but also mass update. You can also bring your content easily via APIs. We have published APIs for project and task content, and even there are other APIs in other areas such as process management and test management and analytics. So I really recommend that you explore API Hub, where all the APIs that are released for SAP Cloud ALM are published. As a project lead, I always have a Gantt chart view. So as you can see, I can see my entire schedule in a visual style. And you also see that you can see the release timeline and the deployment plan details in this view. So if you want to align all your sprints to your deployment plan, then the view like this is pretty handy. So here I'm in the Launchpad and you see the style, release and timelines. So this is a classic view that is beneficial not just to the project lead, but also the release and deployment lead and multiple other project leads, in which they can together look at the screen and see how the release timelines are aligned to the project's time boxes, if the project milestones are ending, when the release is ending, and also if there is an external event which you can't even control, such as an SAP S/4HANA Cloud upgrade, which then changes your planning. And now let's continue the story with the requirement that was created. So the requirement processing is a pretty lightweight process. The requirements also have approval built in. You may have a process that please do not work on a requirement which has not been approved yet. So you can use this approval field and ensure that you set it to ready for approval when it has sufficient details. And later the approver can then decide. The approver can approve or reject the requirement. What's important to note is approval is not controlled by a detailed authorization schema at the moment. It may be enhanced in future, but for now, what you have is a detailed history at your disposal. That means no one can abuse this process, and anything anybody does is logged, and that's why it can be easily audited. After you create a requirement, you can break it down into smaller units called user stories. So let's do that. Now you can see I have created 2 user stories, and now let's see how does the planning process happen. A business user can indicate a requested release so that the release and deployment manager knows when should this requirement be prioritized. Then the business user can also give additional attributes. As an example, workstream. Here you can even add custom work streams using Excel upload, or tags which can be just easily created by typing. And now let's proceed to testing. So now let's see how the testing process works. The testing process starts in parallel with development, and the advantage of SAP Cloud ALM is whenever you scope a process, a skeleton of that is created that helps you in accelerated creation of the manual test cases. So I have scoped a process BKJ, and let's see, can I quickly create a test case for that. So let me save this. And you can see that the structure is automatically created by system. I just need to fill the details. I can also decide if I have to test all these activities or some of the activities are not in scope, and that way I can really optimize my testing efforts. What you also need to know is SAP Cloud ALM supports not just in manual test cases but also automated test cases. Especially for SAP S/4HANA Cloud, the test automation tool for SAP S/4HANA Cloud is connected to SAP Cloud ALM easily, and then you have a harmonious look and feel of not just your manual test cases and your automated test cases, and you can see them together in the traceability reports. And moving on to change and deployment management, we have an entity called feature. Feature is your route to production. Feature is your book of record, book of change, and feature is also something that keeps transports together. You can create the feature easily by clicking on this create option in the feature management. And the interesting part is you can link the feature to existing user stories and requirements. And that's how the traceability reports become more and more meaningful. So let's assign a requirement. And this is the requirement that we created. So let me quickly assign that to the feature. And I can save it. And I can also go ahead and assign the user stories that came from this requirement. This is the flow we recommend. You start with the requirement, break it into user stories, but assign those user stories into features so that your traceability works irrespective of the direction. That means if you see requirement traceability, user story traceability, or feature traceability, you see always consistent information. To keep the video short, I will not show the full life cycle of the feature, but what you need to understand, it's done via the combination of actions at the top which set specific status in the bottom. Feature in general definitely supports you in your transports. For on-premise systems and private cloud edition, the transport capabilities are mature, in which you can even release the transports from SAP Cloud ALM. What is really important is how do you get the timeline for deployment? So a feature also looks at the release information, and that's why it comes in the radar of the release manager. So let's do that and assign a release to the feature. And you can always assign the scope. So let's save it. Now let's come back to the testing, because before the deployment happens, it's really important that test cases have been prepared and they are attached to the requirements and user stories and even tested successfully. So how can you do that? You can go into a test case and set the test preparation status to be prepared. So after your test cases are prepared, you can attach them to the requirements or user stories. So let's do that. So I'm in the requirement. I can go to the test case tab. I can go into the edit mode and I can assign the test cases. Let's also see how the test execution happens. So I have the test cases which I plan to execute, and I can start the execution. I can record my observations in case something is passing or failing, and I can use rich text and even images. And if something is not working as desired, I can set it to failed, and I can even create a defect. And you see in the test execution, I see that now a defect exists. Now let's kind of summarize on how it all comes together for not just project lead, but for multiple stakeholders. So the overview page gives you a quick visual picture of where your project is, how it is doing, what are the different assets have been created, what are the different stages in which they exist, if there are some things that need your immediate attention. Information is in different cards, and you can see as an example how many things are overdue, and also the logical sequence as a person, how many tasks are explicitly assigned to you or which are tasks assigned to your role. To manage this information, you can also go to manage cards, and you can change the order of these cards or hide certain cards if they do not give you value. Now let's see the detailed reports. So there are many reports that are available at your disposal. So as an example, I mentioned solution process traceability. So you can easily see from a process perspective how your process is proceeding, if your process has test cases which are already prepared, if they have test cases which have been executed, how many requirements exist for a process, and that's where the business process expert feels completely relaxed and always in control. There is an alternate view for requirements, and similar views exist for features, user stories, and so on. So the idea is these reports are tailored to personas and optimize their working style so they see quick information and can take appropriate action. As an example, I can even navigate to a particular record by clicking here, or even I can select multiple requirements, click on this requirement overview, and then get back to a very specific list actionable that is read. For test execution and defects also, there are nice reports that give you alternate visualization styles as well, and you can easily download this data into an Excel sheet. So the last report which I want to talk about is project progress, in which you can see how your project is proceeding in different phases. If you have created sprints, then in different sprints. And also if you want to track it via deliverables, which is a more aggregated metric, then you can see how your project is proceeding in different deliverables. So that's all I wanted to cover in this video in an end-to-end fashion. Hope it was useful to you, and thanks for watching. Have a great day.